I wanted to talk a little bit more tonight about the bardos and just a couple of comments. We're not going to go sort of deep into these more esoteric teachings. That's what um, the Bardo Thodol is. It's a fantastic resource and elucidation of these different states and what goes on in great detail. And as I mentioned before, we are incredibly fortunate to be born as human beings and to be able to encounter the Dharma and to be able to encounter people who can help us and support us and teach us. And, we are incredibly fortunate to be able to take refuge in our own awakened nature and this Dharma, these truths, and this Sangha, this community that supports us. So amazing opportunity we have. And I mentioned before that there are sort of, you can divide it up into different ways, but basically 6 different Bardo or intermediate states. And there's our normal waking life, and there's the Bardo of meditation, which we were just in, the Bardo of sleep, the Bardo of dying, sometimes called the painful Bardo of dying. And there's the luminous Bardo of Dharmata, or the essence of things as they are, where we're able to realize that if we are awake and know what we're experiencing, what we're seeing, what we're hearing. And then there's the Bardo of becoming and of rebirth. I wanted to ask if there are any kind of questions or comments up to this point. I know this is pretty. If you're new to this, it can be pretty wild, kind of strange ideas, new ideas. So I wanted to pause for a moment and make some space if anybody has any questions or comments. If you've or if you've watched any of those videos about this, or nothing. Okay. Before I sort of say any more about that, I want to backtrack just a little bit and remind you and mention again the 6 realms of samsara. And we talked about these a couple of weeks ago. The 6 realms being the God realm. They're highly evolved beings, but still part of the samsaric existence. The jealous gods, these beings are very jealous of one another and often in competition. The human realm, the hungry ghost realm, and this is the type of being that is always hungry and thirsty. And there's amazing visual representation of this. You can see this in a lot in Tibetan art, is these beings with very large bellies, but very, very long, skinny necks and a tiny little mouth. And they want to constantly stuff themselves, but they have this tiny mouth and this very long neck, and they can't. um, and uh, uh, and so they're walking around constantly hungry, constantly thirsty, and not just literally but metaphorically as well. Then there's the animal realm, um, and that is sort of characterized by um, a lack um, intelligence or knowing. Sort of, it's characterized by ignorance. And then there's the hell realm, which is often equated with um, anger and violence, just like unrelenting anger and violence. And so, you can sort of think of these in a literal sense, but you can also think of these in a metaphorical or more psychological sense. You know, literally, we're all human beings, but we all have the experience of being in these different realms. So I just wanted um, to draw a little bit of attention to that. So not to take it completely literally, but to understand that these are also psychological states. Like we've all been hungry, right? And just fed ourselves, right? Think of popcorn at the movies, right? You can't eat it fast enough. Um, and so, in that state of mind, we're sort of like hungry ghosts, you know, being jealous, being angry, being ignorant, being so enamored with the pleasures of life and the comforts of life, you know, that would be the God realm, that we don't even think about the Dharma. We don't even think about anything beyond what is right in front of us with our senses. So just wanted to go back and kind of talk about those for a second and think about those in more psychological and metaphorical ways as well. But in terms of the wheel of samsara, we could be reborn into any of these realms. So um, also also keep that in mind. The Bardo Thodol, which I've mentioned, literally translated means um, liberation through hearing. Um, that we have, or beings have, an amazing opportunity to wake up and realize the true or deeper nature of things when they are in especially the luminous bardo of true reality. But um, the Bardo Thodol really sort of concentrates and focuses and discusses the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of Dharmata, and the Bardo of rebirth, the Bardo of becoming. Um, when we are um, what we call, for example, in hospice, actively dying, so our life, our physical life is coming to an end, the life of our body is coming to an end. There's a process, and I won't go into the details of it, but from this perspective, what happens is the elements or the constitutive elements that we're made up of start to break down. And in terms of the traditional Tibetan elements, the more solid elements break down and turn into less solid. So we we go from a state of being more solid to less solid. And so the earth element being the most solid, that kind of disintegrates into the water element, and the water element disintegrates into the air element. or the fire element, and then the fire element disintegrates into the water element, and then the water element disintegrates into consciousness, or what the Greeks called ether, um, the least solid of all. So there's this process of breaking down and coming apart, right? The the skandhas, as we've talked about them, right? We're a compilation of these aggregates, and so these aggregates break down into one another, into less and less and less solid form, until at the end of that process, the body as we know it and consciousness separate. And that is essentially the bardo of dying. And there are particular images and sensations that occur throughout this process. And like I said, the Tibetan Book of Dying, the Bardo Thodol, goes into incredible detail so that we can recognize what is happening as it's happening, right? But after that process happens, then we have or before I go on, during that process, often if we don't recognize what's happening, there's a period where we kind of fall asleep again. There's a complete loss of awareness, kind of like a fainting. It's often described, and it lasts for about 3 days. So there's this period of breaking down, and then at the end of that, if we don't recognize what is happening, we can lose consciousness, and we can sort of faint. Our consciousness just sort of goes dark. Our awareness goes dark for a period of about 3 days. And then after that, we kind of wake back up, and then we're in this, the luminous bardo of becoming, of liberation through hearing, the karmic bardo of becoming, it's often called. And this lasts for a period of about, these next two bardos last for a period of about 49 days, so 7 weeks. And what happens is, in the beginning, all of our, even though we have no body, we're just a disembodied consciousness now. But our perceptual, the inner senses that we've talked about, not the outer senses. We don't have a body, so we don't have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, but we still have the inner senses. And those are not only restored, like if we were blind, for example, in life, in this bardo of true reality, our perceptual consciousness is restored, so that sight is restored. And all of these senses become very acute. And it can be overwhelming if we don't understand what is happening. That's one of the dangers, is we can be completely overwhelmed, because there are sounds associated with this process, and there are incredible visions associated with this process. And what happens is that for the first about 12 days, there are a set of visions or experiences. We have particular Buddhas arise and become present. And we have the opportunity, if we understand, to recognize them and to identify and merge with them. If we don't understand what's going on, we could be afraid, or we could just be so preoccupied in anxiety that we don't comprehend what is happening in the visions that are arising. But for the first 12 days, a series of benevolent Buddhas arise. And we have the opportunity to recognize who they are. And it's a very specific sort of order. Uh, First one set of Buddhas, then another Buddha family, then another, and then another. And this occurs for 12 days. If during this time we do not recognize what happens, then the visions change, and for the rest of the time, the fierce Buddhas arise. So it goes from being very benevolent to becoming fierce and scarier and scarier and scarier as time goes on. But even as these aspects, these other Buddhas arise, the less benevolent ones, they're still Buddhas, and they're still trying to help us understand the reality of where we are and what is happening to us. So the important thing is not to be frightened, but to be present and aware, and to identify with these other less benevolent aspects of Buddha. So one aspect is a very scary looking Buddha, but it is the sort of the other side of compassion, right? Not all compassion is warm and fuzzy and benevolent, and these other Buddhas, for example, are manifestations of fierce compassion or fierce realization and understanding, or a fierce open heart. So, so there are these ongoing sort of changing emanations of these different Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and families and whole retinues of different Buddhas. And again, throughout all of this, we have the opportunity to realize what is happening and to sort of identify with these Buddhas. And if we are able to do that, if we are able to understand what is happening and to sort of recognize and kind of merge with these Buddhas, then that is the way we escape samsaric existence. So there's this series of initially benevolent and then less and less benevolent Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Now, if we don't recognize what is happening, then the sort of the next thing that happens, the next intermediate state, is the Bardo of becoming, the Bardo of rebirth. And here we, if we reach this point, we're probably frightened, we're probably anxious, our consciousness is anxious, and we just want to escape what is happening to us. And what happens is we see the opportunity to be born, and if we're not mindful and aware of what's happening, then we'll just choose the first sort of opportunity to be reborn. And it may or may not be a particularly good set of circumstances that we sort of flee to. So we have the opportunity to to block our birth, as I talked about last week, and then we have the opportunity, if we're not able to do that, to choose our next rebirth. So, as I mentioned, all of this, the momentum of all of this is our previous karma and the clinging that our consciousness has of, holding on to an identity. It's also talked about as the sort of holding on to the samskaras, the mental formations, that aggregate of mental formation. So if we don't block our birth, if we aren't able to choose a good birth, we are reborn. Or if we do choose a good rebirth, we are reborn. And then the consciousness is again joined with a body, a physicality. And so you have a consciousness and body together again in a new physical existence. So that's sort of the cycle of samsara, how we cycle through these different intermediate states. So, any questions or comments?
So people that are born handicapped, they actually choose to be born handicapped for some reason. Is that right?
If it is, we don't necessarily choose all of the conditions that we're born under. We can choose the parents that we're born to, but not necessarily the conditions that we're born under. So it's not like, we see these parents and then we see ourselves and our life extend out. We don't kind of see that in that way. We just see the parents, not the conditions that we will be born under or with. So not necessarily. What the books say, what the teachings say, is that we sort of can choose which part of the world in which we're born, and then we can kind of choose or gravitate towards a particular set of parents. And this is done at the moment of conception. So we make our choice, and then that is the moment of conception.
So the parents don't have any say in this, really.
They only have, they're not choosing a particular consciousness to, no. It gets very complicated because we start to talk about karma, and karma is, in some sense, it's very simple, but in some, the deeper you sort of dig into it, it gets incredibly complicated very fast. And so each parent has their own karma, their own sort of way in which they're moving through their existence and their life, you know? So you have one person and then you have another person's, and those sort of karmic streams meet. And then you have, in the case of, um, you know, uh, a birth or a rebirth, then you have another sort of stream coming in and entering, and it's very complicated. It's not it's far too complicated for us to sort of mentally comprehend. It's said that as we approach awakening, we're able to understand these relationships. We can see into the past and into the future as we become more and more awakened. But for, I would say, you know, that's the uh, exception rather than the rule. So there are stories of the Buddha remembering all of his past existences. Oh, so many, so many existences, so many lifetimes ago, I was such and such an animal. So many lifetimes ago, I was such and such a person, you know, that kind of thing. But that's absolutely extraordinary kind of a vision, which comes close to those kind of psychic powers are developed the further one's practice develops. So, you know, maybe some Rinpoches and some, you know, Zen masters might have some ability to see those sorts of things, but most of us don't have that.
I've known people that did hypnosis and said that they could go back into previous lives with hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they knew me in Scotland. And I've always kind of wondered about that kind of thing. What do you think? Is there any kind of credence to that sort of thing?
Well, there are some interesting anecdotal stories about it, and there are some writings about it in Buddhism, and that ability is absolutely possible, yes, from this perspective. It is absolutely possible. But for, like I said, for most of us, we don't, our practice is not that advanced, and our sort of, well, we call them nowadays psychic abilities, aren't usually that refined. But it's not impossible. It's just unlikely for most of us. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to have glimpses into the past like that. One thing I didn't mention is that in towards the end of the Bardo of Dying, there is when the body and consciousness are separated, there is an incredibly bright light. The way it's written about, it's like thousands of times brighter than the sun. Just an incredibly sometimes it's described as frighteningly bright light. And what that is our pure consciousness without any obstruction. So it is our deepest nature, is apparent to us. And if we can recognize that, then, as I said before, in this practice, recognition and liberation are instantaneous. So if we can recognize what's happening, we are immediately liberated from this samsaric existence, which is part of what makes this such an extraordinary opportunity, and which makes it incredibly skillful to start to understand these things as we're beginning to understand them, to know about these things, to study these things, so that we have the opportunity to wake up when it's presented to us in that way. We can wake up right here and right now also. The Buddha said, you know, what happens after we die is very interesting and an opportunity, but he encouraged us to actually practice in the here and now, not wait until we have died and are going through these bardos to try and wake up. He said, wake up now, try and wake up now. This is the time to do it. We also have the opportunity to do it then, but our effort should go into developing our practice now. So I want to end tonight with a poem you may have heard from Mary Oliver. And she says, to live in this world, we must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. I thank you all for being here tonight, and um, traveling together down this path of understanding. It's not always easy, but as you probably realize by now, the more we delve into these things, the more skillful we can become, whether we're in this bardo or a different one. So I congratulate you and encourage you to keep going, to keep practicing, to keep trying to understand, to cultivate a quiet mind and an open heart, because those abilities will help us no matter what bardo we're in, no matter what state we're in. So thank you for your effort. Thank you for your intention. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you, Jeffrey. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
You're welcome, Ken. CJ.
Good night.
Night. Take care.